Hey, this is Tristan Morrison from Morrison Hughes here with Burke in my office. Bo is one of our senior personal injury litigators. We're going to talk a little bit about trial and what takes a case to trial. So, again, Tristan Morrison and Burke, 404 Law Team. Let's talk about trial.
All right. What do you want to know?
Everything. Bo.
Everything. I don't know if I can teach you everything.
Okay. Well, let's start with this. Before trial, usually there's some settlement negotiations, typically. What kind of factors do you take into account when you're thinking about, do I want to try to settle this case, or is this a case that we want to go and put in front of a jury because we believe a jury is going to give us more?
So that's generally very fact specific. A lot of times it really depends on what the insurance company or the defendant has been willing to offer without going to trial. Honestly, it's not uncommon for a lot of other law firms to not actually be willing to take a case to trial.
You don't say. So when I'm driving across Highway 75 or 85 and there's billboards and there's literally dollar signs falling from the sky on the billboards, are you suggesting that some of those law firms might not actually go to trial?
Some of them probably don't, and some of them are probably not willing to take as many cases to trial as we are. A lot of people only like to go to trial on cases they know they're going to win. Sort of things, but a lot of them don't, and a lot of insurance companies know that they're not going to go to trial, and so they'll lowball literally until you're on the courthouse steps because you have to convince them you're actually willing to go all the way through with it.
So part of being a good litigation personal injury attorney is actually going to trial periodically, because if you don't, insurance company's going to keep track of that, and then they're not going to offer you anything.
Yeah, no, insurance companies literally have an Excel spreadsheet. It's probably not Excel, but they have a spreadsheet of pretty much every lawyer that has ever sued them. And they take how many times they've been sued, how many times they've gone all the way to trial, what the verdicts have been, what they settled for, all that sort of stuff. And so they generally have a pretty good idea of whether or not you're going to be willing to take something to trial.
So what I'm taking from that is that if I'm somebody who's been in a car wreck or any sort of personal injury case, and I'm trying to decide which of these lawyers, on the internet, on TV, whatever, to hire, one of the things I should be asking that attorney is, when was the last time that you went to trial, and what kind of an outcome did you get?
So I wouldn't necessarily go with just the last time you went to trial or necessarily the outcome, because there's a relatively famous saying among people who actually do trials. If you're winning all of them, you're not trying enough cases. Because you want the lawyer who's willing to take your case to trial, even if they're not 100% that they're going to win, because sometimes juries do crazy things, but you want the guy who's actually willing to take your case all the way through, if that's what your case requires.
Sure. Well, and if somebody's not going to take your case even into litigation, if you've got a law firm that does all the pre-litigation stuff and then says, well, we're going to find a real trial law firm to handle the case, then you really split the case in half. You're essentially losing out on having one good set of attorneys that are handling it from cradle to grave.
Yeah, so that's definitely, we have definitely taken cases that have been handled by other people for the pre-lit stuff, and it gets a lot more difficult to handle those cases, because a lot of times if you weren't preparing for trial from the beginning, then it's a lot harder to actually get it ready for trial.
Okay.
And so for what we do, whether we think your case is going to go to trial or not, we go ahead and start prepping your case for trial from day one so that we know what we need, what our plan is. We're gathering the evidence we need from day one, because we know that if we can take your case to trial and we're ready to take your case to trial, then the insurance company is going to offer you more money because our threat is credible that we will actually go take your case to trial.
What's some of the evidence that you've seen the law team gather that a pre-lit law firm's not going to think to gather?
One of the things that we will do in some situations, we have gone out to gas stations and banks and stuff like that and gotten their surveillance camera footage, but that requires you actually leaving your office. And a lot of pre-lit law firms don't like leaving the office because that's hard, and you can make more money just sitting there selling cases for less than they're worth. So, that's one of the things we've done. We've hired experts to inspect cars. We inspect almost every car that comes through, assuming it's still available, so that we have all of the evidence for that, whereas a lot of people don't ever inspect a vehicle until or unless they just absolutely have to. So that's one of the things that definitely sets us apart from other law firms.
Where does a vehicle go? Like, if I'm in a car wreck and my car is totaled, where does my car even go?
So it's going to go to several places. It's generally going to end up at a tow yard first, so whichever tow truck came out is generally going to end up there. And then it's going to end up at like one of 3 or 4 places in Atlanta that just takes all wrecked cars. The biggest one is a place called Copart. I think they're nationwide at this point. They've got about 7 or 8 locations across the state of Georgia, and every one of them has thousands and thousands of wrecked cars. And so we go out, we put on our high-vis vests, we make them bring the car up to the front, we take all the pictures, we do all the measurements, and we get all the information that we need to make sure that we have the evidence for trial if we have to get that far.
That's really smart, because if there's some question about how the accident happened, then you need the measurements, you need to have the, everything inspected to show that our client's version of the wreck is the true version, and then the other guy who caused the wreck, that whatever they're saying to the police officer when the police officer comes out doesn't match up with the physical evidence.
Yep. And one of the more interesting ones of those is our law partner Hill had one, and there was a dispute about exactly how the crash occurred, and we ended up proving it by where our client's coffee cup ended up in her car. Because if it had happened the way they said it would have happened, her coffee cup should have ended up on one side of the car. If it happened the way we said it should have happened, it would have ended up on the other side. And we didn't know that was going to be an issue for the majority of it until we got closer to the end and sort of stuff. But we had gone out and we had pictures of the inside of the car, outside of the car, and everything. And that one picture that most people would never go get is what made the insurance company believe that it was, in fact, their client's fault.
That's fascinating. So if there had been no inspection of the vehicle, then that case could have been lost.
Yeah, then it would have been a he said, she said case. And those are a lot harder to win because everyone is somewhat biased towards their side. Insurance companies are going to argue that our client has all the reason to lie because she or he is just trying to get the money from the insurance company. And then we're going to argue that the defendant has all the reason to lie because they're trying to not get in trouble and have their premiums go up and stuff like that. And so then it's just who does the jury believe? And you don't really ever want to have to be in a situation of who does the jury believe because you get nervous, you say something wrong, you get tripped up or something like that, and all of a sudden you've lost your case. Whereas if you have all the evidence and you can prove it up front, then you don't have to worry about that because now it's not a he said, she said, it's our client said, and here's evidence to back it up.
So let's talk a little bit about what a client should expect when trial's going to start, what you're doing and how you're preparing them for it, and then just kind of what happens at trial.
Yeah, so I'll say a lot of what happens, the client is not necessarily going to be completely involved in. Usually what happens is first we're going to do what's called a consolidated pretrial order, and that is where both the plaintiff and the defendant, their attorneys get together and we say, here are our witnesses, say here are our witnesses, here's the evidence, here's our documents, all that sort of stuff. And we get that in so everyone kind of knows the scope of what's actually going to happen at trial. And then we do what's called motions in limine. It's remarkably similar to criminal trials and things you might have seen where you go and you argue, is this evidence coming in or is it not coming in? For car accident trials, there's not usually a whole lot of that. There are a lot of those cases that have gone to trial, so everyone really kind of knows the answer to a lot of it, so we can agree on a lot of it, but there's always something we're fighting about as to whether or not we're allowed to talk about that or not.
Well, and we'll talk more about that when we come to tort reform.
Yeah.
That has really changed a lot of things.
It is going to change a lot of things. Generally speaking, for the actual client and what they should expect, depending on how long I think your case is going to be, we generally bring you in the weekend before trial. So this is going to be I'm ruining your weekend situation, but we've ruined mine as well. And I'm not going to lie, I kind of love it. It's one of my favorite times that the office is empty, I'm not necessarily wearing a suit, and I'm just gearing up for trial. It's the only thing I'm thinking about. I don't have to worry about anything else because the only thing that matters right now is your trial. We'll bring you in and we're going to sit down and we're going to talk about everything that is going to happen for your trial specifically, which witnesses we're calling, when we're going to call them, what we're planning on doing, and walking everything through it with you. And then we're going to spend a long time, like I'm talking generally it's hours, with you over your testimony. Because in most car accident cases, the single most important thing is whether or not a jury likes you. I've always liked to consider trial play where someone's trying to throw you off, right? So it's kind of like you're trying to put on a play, and then someone's over here like throwing rocks at you, trying to distract you and make it harder for you. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to make sure we know our roles and what we're doing as well as possible, so that the other side can't throw rocks at our trial and knock us off what we're trying to do. So we're gonna spend a lot of time going over your testimony. You're gonna be on the stand for a while. It's not always a lot of fun, but you're gonna know what I'm gonna ask you because we're gonna have gone over it ad nauseum. until you are comfortable and I think you're comfortable. And then we're also going to prep you on what we think the other side's going to ask you. So you're going to have a really good idea. It might not be in the same order or anything, but you're probably going to know the majority of the questions that they're going to ask you before you actually get up there, because we want you to be as comfortable as possible. And so we'll go over all of that. We also generally bring in either some other witnesses. We might have you there or not, kind of depending on the strategy for the trial. But that's kind of what goes into it leading up to trial. And so that's going to be the client's biggest portion preparing for trial, is kind of being there with us, getting ready, knowing what to wear, how to act, and especially their testimony.
Okay. And so when we finally do get to court, what's the first thing that happens in a car accident trial?
So the first thing that happens in a car accident trial is we're going to show up bright-eyed and bushy-tailed at like 8:30, and then the judge is going to be late. This judge is always late. It never fails. We show up and the judge is late.
If there are any judges watching, we love you. You're never
Yeah,
late.
they usually have something very important that they're supposed to do that, doesn't involve our case, and they're not allowed to tell us about it. But without fail, it's usually 5 or 10 minutes. They come walking in, sort of things. And then we're going to go over any last-minute issues. Because without fail, we will have come up with something last minute while we were prepping for trial over the weekend that we need to discuss with the judge before we get started.
Is that like a motion, or is that just a topic for trial?
It can be any number of things. So it might be a last minute kind of motion in limine. Is this evidence coming in? Is it not? It's a, hey, Your Honor, we just realized that this person moved into the county that we're trying the case. So we need to talk to the jurors about whether or not they know this person, whether it be a witness or something like that. And so it's usually just kind of procedural sort of stuff, but there's always something that we have to talk about ahead of time.
So when do we first get to meet the jury?
So when we first get to meet the jury is after we've handled all that procedural stuff. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to meet what's called the jury pool, right? And so what happens is we're all going to be sitting in the courtroom. We're going to literally take our chairs around our tables and spin them to the other side most of the time. And then the judge is going to bring in anywhere from 30 to, I think the biggest one I did was 180 people, sort of thing. So like it just depends on the size of the case, how many witnesses there are, how long it's going to take, stuff like that. For most car accidents cases, the trials rarely go more than a week, and they're usually only a couple of days, so usually only have 30 people that come in.
So a car accident case, cradle to grave, trying the case, it could be a day or it could be more than a week.
Yeah, generally, and usually we'll know that ahead of time, right? Because I've tried enough cases, usually the defense attorney's tried enough cases, and we got a really good idea as to how long it's going to take. And it's always going to take about a half a day longer than we think. So it does not matter how much extra leeway I give myself, it's going to take a half a day longer than I think it's going to. But we usually know about how long it's going to take because we got a really good idea of how many witnesses we're going to have, the documents we're going to bring in, and whether or not, honestly, if it's a contentious case. There's some defense attorneys out there that the insurance companies hire that are just straight up bulldogs and will fight about anything and everything just to make our life more difficult. And that's one way to do it. I kind of like those guys because they keep me on my toes.
Well, also, they can piss off a jury.
Yeah, that's the other thing I really like about them is when they go really hard at my client or they're just being obnoxious and objecting to everything, and a jury gets mad at that, especially if they get overruled a lot. Because they're just slowing down the case. They're making that jury have to hang out there longer.
Yeah, the jury just wants to go home for dinner.
Yeah, the jury wants to get home for dinner. So I always try to keep everything I can as short and sweet as possible. But yeah, so most of the cases, they'll be generally 2 to 3 days, and then it goes to the jury. I will say the majority of my experience for car accidents is juries take anywhere from 4 to 12 hours to come to an actual verdict, but they can take as long as they want.
Okay, so they can take days to deliberate if they want to.
They can, but that also means they have to keep showing back up. So usually they try to get it wrapped up. But
I love to ask attorneys this. What was the fastest verdict you ever got? How long did it take?
The fastest verdict I ever got was, I think it was an hour and a half. And it was this really weird case. It involved a tractor trailer and a lady pulling out and then someone going straight. There were multiple people at fault, but the only person still involved were the people that got hurt and this truck driver. And the jury, within minutes, for the most part, from what we could tell, decided what they were going to do. That was probably the fastest one I ever had.
Okay, what's the longest?
Longest one I ever had, that was not fun case. It involved some inappropriate actions by youth ministers. And that one was, I think, 4 days. We wrapped everything up. We tried the case in 6 days. So we wrapped everything up, like we started on a Monday, wrapped everything up the following Monday, and then they didn't come up with their verdict, I think, until the Friday. Towards the end of the day, I think they were like, we're not ruining another week. Finally came to their conclusion.
Interesting.